And good evening to you. I'm Marnie Hughes. We begin tonight with breaking news in the Gabby Petito case. After a months-long investigation, we now have the findings of an internal review into that traffic stop on August 12th of a fight between Gabby and Brian Laundrie in Utah. This, as you may remember, was a key moment in this case and one we all saw play out on police body camera footage. And the question that many are still asking all of these months later, would Gabby be alive today if the incident was handled differently? The report talks about this. You may remember that stop happened just days before Gabby's death and one of the last times she was seen alive. It was 5 months ago, and tonight we are going to dive into this report. It is 99 pages long. I've got it right here. I've been highlighting it. I'm reading it. I'm not done, I'll be honest with you. And it's rough around the edges, but we're going to dive in. Investigators are calling some of what is in this report unintentional mistakes during that traffic stop. Correspondent Brian Nenton is standing by, as well as former FBI agents Jennifer Coffendorfer, and also Dennis Franks is with us tonight to review the report and the case all these months later. Potentially some answers in these pages. But first, it has been several months since these new developments in the case, one that we all followed closely here on NewsNation Prime with you. So for a moment, we want to take a look again at the timeline and also the details and how we got here tonight. It was September 13th when Gabby Petito's story reached the world. Well, have you heard about this? This couple set off on their dream cross-country road trip and documented the entire thing on YouTube, and then only one of them came back. It has set off a nationwide search for a 22-year-old. Her name is Gabby Petito.
Hello, hello.
Within days, suspicions grow around the only person who was on the trip with her.
At this point, has he talked to police at all?
No.
And how frustrating is that?
It is 100% frustrating. I mean, the fact that we have somebody who may have been the last person who's seen her, who has specific details on her potential whereabouts.
It doesn't make sense, and it's unfair to say that you can sit in the background when basically the entire nation is trying to figure this out.
Igniting a nationwide search.
This is what matters. That is it. I'm asking for help, everyone at home. I'm asking for help from the parents of Brian.
Days later, we get a new picture of the couple's relationship.
Body cam footage surfaced in Utah.
We drove by and the gentleman was slapping the girl. He was slapping her? Yes.
Galvanizing an entire online community.
So everybody stop scrolling and pay attention to this poster.
Before a heartbreaking discovery.
Sadly, though, she was found today in Grand Teton National Park.
The pressure surrounding the Laundrie family gets even bigger.
Absolutely, you should turn himself in.
Turn yourself in. They're hunting. They'll find you.
Each night, shocking new information. And she said, Brian grabbed my face. She's clearly distraught. We see some new angles of that police encounter. As an investigator, how do you receive this video and what do you do with it?
She was definitely victimized here.
New voices enter the story. We start tonight with Brian Laundrie's sister, Cassie.
Well, let's just go to the headline here because I couldn't believe it when I heard it. She was asked,
do you think they're involved, your parents?
And she said, I don't know. She didn't say no. She said, I don't know.
New accusations.
If he was staying with his parents at the house and I was out there were a lot of police outside the house a lot of the time.
Why didn't you see him?
I didn't see him, and I was out there. Police were out there. I mean, we've heard stories. Could he have gone out a back door? Could he have, run through a yard? I mean, do you have any idea?
Yeah, no.
And revelations.
Cause, death by strangulation, and manner is homicide.
After weeks of frustrating searches, just when it seemed like there was nowhere else to look, this. We begin with breaking news in the Gabby Petito case and that ongoing manhunt for Brian Laundrie.
They have found human remains.
You have suggested that any claims that the Laundries planted items in the reserve is hogwash. Why?
Do you realize how ludicrous that is? How aggravating, how maddening it is to even hear those things? And the fact that it's being put out there by the press as well? That's where my level of frustration and anger is coming from. So if I'm the only one who has to say that this is hogwash because I didn't want to say the word bullshit, then I'm going to say it. It's bull. I'm sorry.
And after all this, some wonder what's next, where the investigation goes from here, and most importantly, will Gabby ever get justice?
And you may be asking, what are we doing tonight? Going back through all of these details, once again focusing on this case. I want you to focus on the last line you just heard there. Will Gabby ever get justice? And more importantly, how do we improve the system that potentially failed her? That is what this investigative report does tonight. It documents that traffic stop. It documents issues of domestic violence. It documents what police did on the side of that road in Moab, Utah, what they did right, what they may have done wrong, and what we can all do to prevent this from happening again. Few things I want to point out before I introduce Brian Entin once again. This was an independent investigation done of that traffic stop, and it offers a lot of details about what happened, and it took months and months to get it. We just got it a couple of hours ago. Officers who responded to the incident, the report says, made several unintentional mistakes that stemmed from the fact that the officers failed to cite Ms. Petito for domestic violence. Issue number one. The report also recommends improvements to both the policies and the training of Moab police. They also say additional training in domestic violence investigations, as well as additional legal training to ensure officers understand state laws and statutes moving forward is necessary. Okay, with that, I want to bring in Brian Entin. As you know at home, and you've been following this case, Brian has been on this investigation from the start. He spent months in front of the Laundrie home in Florida as we waited for new information in the search for Brian. Of course, tonight we know Gabby is gone, Brian is dead, and the search for answers continues. All right, Brian, one thing stood out to me in this report, and I want to get your take. The investigator said there are many what ifs, and so we've got a full screen to share with people at home. There are many what ifs that have presented itself as part of this investigation. The primary one being, would Gabby be alive today if this case was handled differently? That is an impossible question to answer, despite it being the answer many people want to know. Nobody knows, and nobody will ever know the answer to that question. My job is to provide information into the details of this investigation and if it was handled appropriately. So here we are tonight, Brian. First of all, you've read through what you can so far of the report. Give me your top line thoughts.
Well, what you just read, Marnie, I thought it was really interesting that they included that line in an official report. And I was listening to the recap of all the coverage we did. And you have to understand why this report is so important. This traffic stop was 2 weeks before the last time anyone heard from Gabby Petito. And what happened during this traffic stop and the way the two officers handled the traffic stop did impact the entire thing. We would not be even here doing this story right now if things happened differently during this traffic stop. That is why this report is so important, and you mentioned it. Hopefully other police departments will learn from what happened here. So what really stood out to me was, first of all, that the investigators said that there were many mistakes made by the Moab Police Department, but that none of them were intentional. They said they were not intentional, and in the interviews with the officers, they explained just how awful these officers feel. I mean, the officers basically said this has changed their life forever, and this is something they live with every day. But regardless, mistakes were made. Number one, the investigator said the officers should have made an arrest. There was probable cause. This was a domestic violence situation and should have been treated as one, and there should have been an arrest. But what's interesting is they say the arrest should not have been a Brian Laundrie, but based on the specifics of just this incident, they say that Gabby Petito should have been arrested, but we know that did not happen.
I want to let our control room know that we've got that 911 call, and so I'm going to call for that in just a moment if you guys can get that ready. But Brian, I want to get your thoughts on that 911 call, because that was a lot of this investigation. And on page 25 of the report, they said they talked about why they didn't follow up with the 911 caller or the report. They said, quote, "There is not an excuse for it. It can explain it. I can't excuse it." So you may recall that a man called 911, said he saw an assault at a nearby co-op. Let's play that call, and then, Brian, I want you to kind of catch people up to what happened in this call and what the report says about it.
We drove by and the gentleman was slapping the girl. He was slapping her? Yes, and then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk. He proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove off.
Okay, you said it's a white van?
White van. I give you the license plate if you give me 1 sec.
All right, Brian. So walk us through what happened after that. And the report indicates that police should have gathered more statements, followed up with that caller to identify exactly what had happened to add to the report.
Yeah, so they did not follow up with that caller, which was one of the issues here. In fact, they didn't really follow up on much of anything, which is one of the things that was called out in this investigative report. What's interesting about that 911 call is that you hear the witness say that they saw Brian Laundrie hitting Gabby Petito, but when the officers responded, what you heard was Gabby Petito saying that she was actually the aggressor. And what's interesting about the report is even with the context of the 911 call, the investigator who investigated the officer's actions came to the conclusion that there was probable cause not to arrest Brian Laundrie, but actually to arrest Gabby Petito, and said that it was essentially a mistake that the officers didn't do that.
Right. So determining an aggressor, following up on the 911 call, following Utah statute is also an issue that was raised in this report. I want to again quote something from the report. They said the end result of this investigated incident concluded with separating Brian and Gabby, not making an arrest, either by citation or custody, based on the information provided in the specific incident. Brian would be the victim, Gabby being the suspect. I'm interested, Brian, I know that you have been in touch with off-camera police officers with the Moab Police Department, the police chief. This report indicates that some changes need to be made. What have they shared with you leading up to this investigation and the release of this information about their role in all of it and how they feel?
Well, as I mentioned, the officers feel absolutely terrible and are still dealing with this tragedy every single day, and certainly don't take lightly what happened, and I believe want to learn from this. So does the police department. They plan to put new training in place, which frankly they need based on this report. I mean, there were some major mistakes. Something that really stood out to me, Marnie, was that this entire incident with the Moab Police Department was classified as disorderly conduct, not domestic violence. And the investigator says that was a massive mistake. I mean, most people watching this video now could see that this was a domestic violence incident, and the confusion is why it was categorized as disorderly conduct. If it had been categorized as domestic violence, there would have been a review after. There would have been follow-up. This would have been sent to a prosecutor. And perhaps, 2 weeks went by again from the time of the traffic stop to the time that Gabby Petito was last heard from. Perhaps during those 2 weeks, something could have been done. The report mentions it. Of course, we don't really know whether that would have helped in the end.
Right. And I think it's easy to second guess anything. The investigator did say that the traffic stop lasted about 75 minutes. They had months to go over this case, document every single detail, watch the video, rewind the video, go back and watch it again. So it's much different all these months later to look at the information and the details and what we know happened 5 days later to Gabby in terms of what could have been done. Brian, we'll come back to you in a little bit. Thank you. I want to share with you guys at home, based on the report's findings, a couple key elements here. The city of Moab believes our officers showed kindness, respect, and empathy in their handling of this incident. Regardless of what the report said, changes are going to happen. They also say, quote, they are going to add a trained domestic violence specialist to oversee incidents investigated by Moab officers. Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.